Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be back, joined by Lawrence Conley and Natasha Meikle. Welcome back to the ACSOM Bulletin. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Nice to see you back.
Well, I was just saying, it is refreshing to be doing the Bulletin just twice a week, because obviously hosting duties have been taken over by Kevin Graham, Colin Watt and Laura Bradburn on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday. But there is going to be a change to Monday's schedule next week, Natasha. So before we go any further, tell us what's happening on Monday next week.
That's right. So next Monday, some people might be aware, some people might not, is International Women's Day. And it's a day all about, firstly, celebrating the achievements of women, but also looking forward to what there is to still achieve, and trying to set the groundwork for equality in all sectors. And as you know, you guys know, and everyone who watches the show knows, one of the sectors that women are still seriously unrepresented in is sports media. And I know myself, Laura and Amy are really grateful to Paul and ACSOM for giving us this platform to come on and voice our views. And the more productions like this that do that, the more we'll normalise women in sports media. And that can only be good for everyone. So with that in mind, to celebrate International Women's Day next Monday, we are going to do an all-girls ACSOM Bulletin. Some people have been crying out for this for months, Paul, so we are finally choosing to do it, and what better day to do it on than International Women's Day. So next Monday, 12:30, your Monday club will not be your usual Monday club, but instead will be me, Laura and Amy doing a girls takeover. So we're really looking forward to that, and we'd love for you to come and join us.
It would be great. And as you say, there has been demand for that, Natasha. You're absolutely right. There has been loads of demand. So looking forward to it. Last week, obviously, you were on the show twice, Natasha. You hosted the show with Celtic Shared on Thursday. I've not had a chance, Lawrence, to talk to you about that. What was your thoughts on Celtic Shared, groups of fans getting organised, coming together with a shared ethos? What was your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good show. The boys spoke well. Great idea behind it. All the disparate groups doesn't really do any good, does it? It's like People's Front of Judea, United People's Front of Judea. We kind of need to, at least speak as one, and maybe that'll make communication from the club easier if they've got kind of one umbrella group to deal with. Hopefully, that'll improve things there. But they've got some interesting points on it, and I think that, coupled with the Celtic Trust initiative that's kicked off, it is definitely the way forward.
I think so. Yeah, I thought the boys came across really well. There was questions raised, Lawrence, you know all about the way that the intelligence network works in this country. There was questions kind of raised about their anonymity on the show, but this is really to protect those guys from the harassment that they would inevitably receive from the authorities if they had appeared in full flow and everybody knew who they were. That they may then have contributed to some flack that they got in their workplace, etc. So we felt it was the safest route to have the anonymous screens launched. But as I say, you know all about that in this country, don't you?
Yeah, indeed, there's been a number of boys woken up out of their beds, and it's not right. But it's strange what the authorities seem to deem appropriate. You could have 90 minutes singing, and your Justice Minister telling you it's a great advert for Scottish football, or you can have groups like the Green Brigade that raise fortune for charity, drive from their beds. It's strange. I find it really interesting. The Scottish Government, even if we want to touch on COVID, the Ibrox 5, still waiting.
What you said before we came on is, what's the SFA done about it? And I think the secret is in the name, SFA, and that's what's going to be done about it, Lawrence. But yeah, I share your frustrations on that. I'm raising a question today, a football-related question, around Kris Ajer, simply because, I was watching his performance at the weekend, Natasha, and I found it interesting that he still divides opinion amongst quite a lot of Celtic fans. I thought he was an absolute standout. I know he got the man of the match. I commented that on 5 occasions in quick succession, he cleared Aberdeen crosses, through balls, etc. I thought he was a man mountain at the weekend, and I don't think we can afford to let him go. I think we can afford to let Ryan Christie go. And I think that although I'd like to keep Edouard, we've seen what happens if a player doesn't want to be here, so it's maybe time for Eddie to go. I think part of the rebuild has to include Kris Ajer in there. Do you think it's possible to keep a hold of him?
I mean, I would absolutely love to. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Ajer is monumental and it's imperative that we keep hold of him for next season. Whether we will or not is a completely different issue. Ajer has great ability and I'm sure he has great ambition that'll take him to much better leagues than the Scottish one. Whether we can hold on to him for another couple of years, maybe 1 year, is a different story. You know, he's still young, but we would have to make this a seriously attractive opportunity to him. And it's been suggested that we give him a bumper new contract. It's been suggested that we give him the captain's armband, if that could make him stay. And I'm on board with both of those ideas. I mean, you've touched on it yourself. Aberdeen, you know, are a big team who lump balls into the box, and that's where we've been susceptible all season. And I know Aberdeen don't score many goals of late, but, you know, Ajer dealt with the majority of them absolutely perfectly over the last couple of games against Aberdeen. He's really coming into that role. I think he's been great with Welsh. He's a real steady presence at the back. And when we've got, you know, a big rebuild exercise looming in the summer, having that base to build on of a centre half like Ajer could be absolutely fundamental, and I'd love to see us be able to do it. I think he'd be a great captain. I think he'd be the first name on your team sheet every single week, but in his head now he's thinking, you know, AC Milan could come in for me in the summer. Do I spend another year at Celtic, or do I go now? And I wouldn't blame him for doing it, to be honest. You know, if he wants to further his career and he thinks that now's the right time to do it, I'd be disappointed. I would understand. But I'd love to see the club pull out all the stops to get him to stay.
You know, the big thing for me is looking ahead to next season. Now, all the chat, obviously, is about the new incoming Celtic manager. It's like, you know, the names that are being pulled out of hats left, right and centre. Everybody seems to be linked to the Celtic job. But I'm looking at the rebuild and I'm thinking back to the time where we lost a lot of experience way back, Lawrence, you know, the obvious ones being Burns and Aiken, and it took Celtic years to recover from that loss of experience. You need a number of leaders in order for this rebuild to work. And I think, you know, Callum McGregor's a leader. Scott Brown is in that. Obviously, he's a natural leader. But Kris Ajer's in that mould as well. And I think it would be an absolutely huge loss to Celtic for us to let him go. I remember when we used to do a fairly regular podcast with Alan Morrison, who is Celtic by Numbers is the name of his blog. He now goes out on the Huddle Breakdown. And he used to do the numbers on Kris Ajer. Now, I'm going to get shot down for this, but this was the stats back then. And he was looking at the way that Ajer was progressing, and he hadn't seen those kinds of defensive stats at Celtic Park since Virgil van Dijk. Now, that's not me comparing him, Virgil van Dijk, to Kris Ajer. But back then, when Alan Morrison said that, you know, people were scoffing at the fact that the two players would be spoken about in the same breath. Now, I think that some players leave too soon. Others, like Edouard, for me, are definitely the end of their cycle and they should move on for the better of themselves and of the club. But Kris Ajer, I still think, given the right manager coming in, staying for another year, it's pivotal to Celtic because we need that transition. We need to have these strong characters in the dressing room. But I think it would also be good for him. I heard John Kennedy's comments about the likelihood that Ajer would leave, and it left me kind of feeling that it's inevitable, Lawrence, it's inevitable that Kris Ajer leaves. But if he does, let's have a look at the defence. Look at where we are defensively. I mean, we currently have one permanent player as a left back in Greg Taylor, one permanent right back in Anthony Ralston, and in the centre of defence we have Stephen Welsh and Chris Jullien, who's going to be out right through to maybe October time. So to let Ajer go as well, it's a complete rebuild of the defence before you even start looking at the goalie.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Perry both of you that, you know, Ajer we should keep. I'd like to see him getting a extended run in his correct position. I don't think he's a left-sided centre half. I think we'd be much better, you know, playing him at right back. But he's someone we definitely need to keep. I mean, well, short defensively, I think Tony Ralston will move on. Hendry might come back. He's got rave reviews in Belgium. You know, maybe that loan will have served its purpose if he comes back and as a better player. But we definitely need to sort the defence out from a couple of centre-halves. I was hoping we'd bring in January, but we didn't. Listen, Ajer, depending on who the new manager is, he may fancy staying, depending on what level of ambition Celtic show. It's going to be the player's decision, isn't it?
Well, I mean, you've mentioned Jack Hendry again. Maybe a year ago, if you had spoken about Hendry and Ralston in the same sentence, people would have just switched this podcast off. We're now at that situation that come the summer, they're two of the guys that are going to be fit for those positions at that time. That shows you the real scale of the rebuild. But you mentioned whoever the new manager is going to be, Lawrence. We can't go through a Celtic podcast at the moment without touching on the runners and the riders. Interestingly enough, an Ipswich Town podcast got in touch because we have interviewed Stuart Slater, a 90s player at Celtic, a very highly rated player who we bought for 1.5 million from West Ham. And that interview will go out this weekend. And we are going to use some footage in there as well, just to remind people of the better points of Stuart's career at Celtic. There weren't many. That's not a dig at the player. It was the team that we had at that time was pretty poor. 2 seconds. There we go. Can you hear me now? Yep. So the Ipswich Town guys were basically on talking about Stuart Slater on the back of my announcement that he was going to be on the podcast. Apologies, my sound drops out now and again, but I need to keep an eye on that because there's obviously gremlins in the camp. But what they went on to tell us during this broadcast is that Paul Lambert had resigned from his position at Ipswich. Now, Lambert's had a lot to say for himself over the last week or so in relation to the Neil Lennon situation and the likelihood that he himself might be a future Celtic manager. And I was looking at it with an air of kind of suspicion because I know for a fact that he's one of Lenny's boys. So him and Neil Lennon are still tight. They still speak on a regular basis. And during the last couple of weeks of Neil Lennon's tenure at Celtic, Lambert obviously came out and defended him very, very strongly. Whereas other people were being rubbished for coming out and not defending him. People like, obviously, John Hartson and Stilian Petrov. So I just, when I'm looking at the words coming out of Paul Lambert's mouth, I'm looking at them knowing that he has his own agenda, and his agenda is to stand up for Neil Lennon. So he's come out and he's speaking about how the players have let him down and, it wasn't really Lenny's fault. I think that's absolutely ridiculous to suggest such a thing. And then when he's asked if he would come up to Celtic, he blankly refused. He said he wouldn't come to Celtic. And again, in his words though, he was talking, Natasha, about the fact that there's an expectation to win every game. Well, of course it is. I mean, how do you become a big, successful club if your expectation is anything other than to win every game? But that same attitude, I feel, filtered into Jeremy Frimpong's comments recently this week. What was your thoughts? I don't know if you've been following the Lambert chat. He's been getting interviewed a fair bit. What was your thoughts on that attitude and the kind of output from Jeremy Frimpong?
Firstly, touching on Lambert, he shouldn't even be in the realm of consideration for the Celtic job. He's done himself absolutely no favours at Ipswich. And if we're saying we want to, aim higher than John Kennedy and Jack Ross, Lambert's no higher than any of these manager candidates. So I don't think that he will be in the board's considerations. But he is doing a lot of talking for someone who says that he doesn't want to be, which is interesting. But I think that's a non-starter. The thing that frustrated me more this week, or yesterday in particular, was Frimpong's comments. Frimpong is someone who, he gave a lot when he was here, but he was here for all of 2 minutes. And, now he's coming out and telling Celtic fans that their reaction was over the top and they don't know how to not win. I mean, there's Celtic fans who've been around a lot longer than Jeremy's been alive, who know what it's like not to win all the time and not to be dominating. And, they don't need to hear the patronising comments of a player who was here for, a couple of seasons. And, we've said it so many times. It's not the fact that we're on a bad run. It's not the fact that we're losing games, we're losing the league. It's the manner in which we've completely capitulated this season. If we'd given it 110%, not come out on top, ran it really close, been beaten by a significantly better side, we'd have held our hands up and say, yeah, it was disappointing, but the club and the team did all that they could. and that's where it is. But that's not the case this season. You know, we never got started. This is to be one of the biggest seasons in our history, and if Jeremy thinks our reaction to capitulating in this manner was over the top, then he didn't understand the importance of this season. And, you know, I don't actually blame him solely for that. I blame the people round about him who did know or who should have known the importance of this season for not making sure that the entire squad did. And, you know, that attitude has cost us this season.
Definitely. I see it as a mindset. You know, when I was listening to him, I thought, what are you talking about? I mean, this is a fan base who doesn't like getting beat. No, of course it isn't. I mean, it's not as though we think we are beyond defeat. It's like you say, Natasha, you go back to when Celtic won the league under Wim Jansen. It was won on the last day of the season to prevent Rangers from winning 10 in a row. This campaign was gone, some would say even earlier than January, but it was definitely gone in January. I mean, to hear his words, I kind of thought to myself, what is the mindset? What is the state of mind within that dressing room? Who implements that? The gaffer does. Now, Neil Lennon, in his first tenure, when you think back to seasons gone by, even when we won the league, you know, there was a few defeats here and there. It was almost as if that's going to happen, shrug of the shoulders. And I just believe that the standards that have been set since he's been gone are completely different. And the mindset of never allowing even a draw, never mind a defeat, to enter your state of mind is what I would expect from Celtic. And as you say, in this season of all seasons, that is the mindset. So I was really disappointed in hearing that. I get that he's trying to stand up for a man who's played a big part in his progression. You know, plucking him out of the under-23 squad at Man City, giving him game time. He was a go-to for Neil Lennon, played him virtually all the time, and then he gets his big move, and obviously the player's happy. But at the same time, I did feel it was patronising. I don't think a player can tell a Celtic fan how we should and shouldn't support our club. So yeah, all the best to you, Jeremy, but you're wrong. And I felt as though it was an indication, Lawrence, of this mindset, of this culture that had maybe been implemented under Neil Lennon, where, you know, these standards weren't as high as they should be.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of the mindset used to hear about Bumsies teams, and, you know, Peter Grant would go around to new players' houses and sit and watch get the videotapes out, explain all about the club. I don't know if a bit of that's been lost just now for new players coming in with restriction and who they can meet, etc. So they're seeing each other at training and not having the usual interaction. But yeah, you know, Jeremy probably feels he owes Lenny a bit, as you say. He's got a big move that he's happy with, but kind of shows he really didn't get it, doesn't it? You're kind of going, listen, you know, and I don't think it's ridiculous to expect to win every game. You know, we've the biggest budget in Scotland. We play players fairly well. You know, what's ridiculous about expecting to win every game in Scotland? You know, who should you expect to get beat off? Who should you expect to draw with? I don't know where he's coming from at all. You're kind of going, well, if I'm not expected to win any games, is he saying that there should be some games we expect to draw? Who would that be with? You know, we expect to get beat by whom? Yeah, you know, it's kind of that question. Well, do you expect an Aberdeen to beat us? Are you expecting us to lose to bottom of the league, Ross County? Where's he coming from on it? I don't know.
Exactly. I think it's a dangerous mindset to get into, Lawrence. And it's not about elitism. It's not about, you know, entitlement or any of this kind of thing. It's just that if you set your standard below the bar, then that's exactly the standard you're going to reach. But you mentioned there about obviously winning and constantly winning. Obviously, St Johnstone won and became the second most successful club in Scotland over the last decade by winning the League Cup. And there was a wee viral video going about, obviously going up past Celtic Park and all that kind of stuff. That didn't bother me in the slightest. Is that not just a bit of crack between two?
The video. I thought
there
so.
You go.
I shared it on Twitter, but I thought it was just one bus for St Johnstone, though, not six. Was it?
Is that you going back to? Yeah.
There was apparently a reason for that. Something to do with the length of the journey from the team hotel to Hampden didn't require 6 buses, but I'm not an expert in that. I'll pass on what I read on Twitter.
I did read that. It made sense. It certainly made sense. But what I mean is, yeah, I think it's unacceptable for Celtic to lose any game. I've always had that mindset. But if a club wins a cup, and a club like St Johnstone, you know, with their budget and their season ticket holders, etc., wins a national trophy, and they have a bit of crack on the way up the road Fair play, fair play. And obviously there's a Celtic link in there. I didn't realise this until the powers of Twitter yesterday with the goal scorer Rooney, who is the great-grandson of Bob Rooney, who was the physiotherapist officially at Celtic Park during the Lisbon era. Although I think the only equipment he had was a heat lamp. When you speak to some of the ex-players, going to name drop one of them at the minute, but Tommy Callaghan told a great story that he was on a treatment table and in walked Bob Rooney with his white jacket. They used to wear like doctor's jackets, him and Neely Mockin, to do the old rub down and the heat lamp on the knee. And he was probably putting the heat lamp on the wrong knee, but on the other knee, the fag ash from his cigarette was dropping on Tommy Callaghan's leg. He says that's how tin pot Celtic were back then, but we won the European Cup. It's changed days. It's kind of flipped on its head,
Bob Rooney, was he not like a great cup man, but not something like the boxers trying to get at least Celtic to work their corner? I think he was like really highly rated in sports. I know you're calling it tin pot, but as far as I've kind of read, he was highly rated.
Jimmy Steele was the masseur. He was the guy that came in, from the boxing arena. Jimmy Steele. But Bob Rooney had spent time with Shankly at Liverpool as well. I spoke to his son Benny, of course, who was at Celtic and made his name at Morton. So it's good to see that kind of bloodline being a success at St Johnstone. So the best to them. But when we're looking at managers and candidates, we've all got our own opinions on this. Of course we do, and that's what's great about it. But another interview that I found pretty interesting over the weekend was that with Sean Maloney. So you remember, Natasha, back in October, Kevin and I losing the plot against Aberdeen, and at half-time basically saying Neil Lennon's got 45 minutes to save his job. I've just been reminded actually on Twitter that someone has just said they've re-watched that day, that post-match, and everything we said apparently came to fruition. So I'm going to have to watch that back, because I know it was quite a negative kind of outpouring of frustration after the game. But I was asked, and I did mention Martinez and Maloney back then, and naturally was laughed at for several weeks. But Maloney spoke very well. I don't know if you've seen the interview, Natasha. What was your thoughts on Maloney's comments?
Well, he didn't say no, did he? And I think that's what we've got to hold on to at the moment. Ultimately, he's right. If it's a Maloney and Martinez combination, then that's not Sean's decision alone. And he can't make that for both of them. But they both have strong links to Glasgow. Martinez as well. I believe he's still got a home here. His wife's family are from Glasgow. Maloney, still clearly spends a significant amount of time over here, still lives here. So there are connections to Glasgow that could help make it appealing. But it's up to the board to make the football side of things appealing. They need to offer them the right package, the right autonomy, the right roadmap, and give them what they need to achieve what they want to at the club. And if they can offer them that and offer them this route back into club football, then that would be excellent for us. Now, as I say that, I'm sure that Martinez and Maloney after the Euros are going to have many options back into club football. But for Celtic, it's about making ourselves the most attractive one. And it doesn't seem to be an absolute no. Maloney's not really himself out. Martinez obviously has been silent so far. But the club need to ask the question. They can only say no. That's the sort of level that the Celtic fans want to see the board bring in. That's what they want to match their ambitions. So ask the question. They can only say no, but ask the question and try and get people at that level in.
I think the biggest fear for me is that several other clubs, as you say, will be interested in a lot of the targets. And I say targets, I'm talking about the names that are appearing on the odds lists, the runners and the riders. Now, Lawrence, obviously Martinez and Maloney are box office as a team. A lot of people online are saying, well, what's Maloney actually done? He was here, as a coach. He's never really done anything other than being Martinez's right-hand man. But surely the experience he's gained working at that level would hold him in good stead. Or do you think that it would only be a Maloney-Martinez partnership, or could Maloney come in with a director of football?
Both are options. I'm not too sure how well received it'd be Maloney coming in with a director of football, but again, it'll depend who the director of football is. I think we'd be looking for someone, for me anyway, that would be an experienced and proven manager rather than someone taking the step up. Has Maloney done more than Kennedy? I don't know. He's been working at Belgium. He's been working with some good players. John Kennedy's been working with players for a long time. Neither has been out there and done it by himself. Well, I suppose Kennedy's got an 8-game audition, if you like, but I don't think he'd be the right choice. Yeah, I think it would have to be a Martinez-Maloney partnership to get the fans excited. But it would depend on who your director of football is. But the good thing is, I think Desmond is involved with it. He normally keeps the information tight. He replaced the CEO without anyone naming him as the new CEO in the papers or in the press. And I think he'll go about. I think it's going to be the same for the director of football and the manager. If somebody names one of them, it's going to be more than by chance rather than there's a leak from Dermot's camp.
Now, remember back to when Neil Lennon left. I don't know if yourself, Lawrence, had heard any kind of whispers around about that time when Neil Lennon left first time round. The podcast wasn't set up, so we weren't certainly getting any kind of intelligence or information from anybody. But I do remember that week and being fairly surprised. I hadn't really heard any kind of chat around Lenny leaving at that time. So when he did leave, I think the chat around who's going to replace him back then, if you look back at some of the names, again, Ronnie Deila wasn't the one that was going to excite Celtic fans, was he? But Celtic tried to take a different direction in that. And last Thursday we were chatting, Declan and JP were part of a discussion where, exactly what you said there in terms of the high kind of profile nature of it, getting the fans excited, Lawrence. Is that what Celtic is going to do, Natasha, or are we going to look for something that's more structural in terms of a long term? We've heard about the director of football working with the head coach. We've heard the names, Fergal Harkin and Enzo Maresca has been named numerous times, but also David Webb as a director of football. So, is it something that we can do and still get the fans buy-in? This is going to be the biggest concern. They've not really communicated well enough this season. So how could they sell that idea under the current kind of climate where they've not been talking to us?
It's difficult, like you say, communication, we bang on about it, here it is again. Season ticket renewals around the corner. Celtic fans need to know that we, in the summer, are not going to be left with John Kennedy as manager and a downsizing of the squad. If there's any signs of that, then the renewals are going to take a hit. So what they need to do, they need to decide if they're going to tell us who the new manager, what the new structure is going to look like before the renewals, or if they're going to gamble on the fans trusting that they're going to put the right person in place after the renewals. And the fans' trust this season is at an all-time low. So I think before the renewals come out, the board need to give us some indication of what way they're going. Now, that could be difficult depending on the person that they have identified. If this person is currently in a job, they don't want to disrupt that. If they've got Euro preparations, they don't want to disrupt that. So the club do find themselves in a difficult position with not being in a position to tell us too early, but risking the renewal process by doing that. For me personally, I don't mind seeing the club go down a route of someone who's perhaps not, a box office manager in their own right. The favourite right now on Sky Bet is Enzo Maresca. He hasn't managed on his own outright before. He's at the Man City under-23s. But look who he's worked alongside. He's worked alongside people like Guardiola. Before that, he'd worked with Manuel Pellegrini. He's worked with Unai Emery. He's worked with some top-class managers and some top-class players. And that's the sort of appointment, despite not being, the box office of maybe Martinez or Benitez, that's the sort of appointment I wouldn't mind seeing the club going down with the right structure in place. That could be good for the club and it could help us achieve, more European success, the development of youth players, attracting players in. So for me, I'm happy if the club go down that sort of route, but they do have a conundrum about when they tell us what they're thinking.
No, definitely. It's the names that I keep getting drawn to because of the biggest aspect of that is look at the Manchester City link. We've been speaking about Jeremy Frimpong. Other players that have came to Celtic either permanently or on a loan deal. We've had Boyata, Guidetti. There's been so many of them. Paddy Roberts, of course. Let's not forget Paddy. So many of them who have come to Celtic and Denier, there's another Man City player that came up, and of course they were ready to announce the appointment of, or they certainly were interested in Ronnie Deila in terms of their youth academy when we made him manager, and there is that link there. And I just think, Harkin and Maresca, if you'd asked me 3 or 4 months ago who they were, I probably couldn't tell you. to be honest with you, because I'm so engulfed in Celtic and what Celtic are doing. But the more I think about that, the more I think, well, that's more of a long term. If we're looking at the transfer issues that are going to be thrown up by the financial aspect of COVID, but also the political aspect of signing players post-Brexit in terms of work permits, then it might have to be a situation where we are going to have a joined-up approach between the academy and the first team, so that we're producing players for Celtic. We're not producing players who either go to foreign shores before they get an opportunity to play for Celtic, or they're released and they end up making up the great bulk of the rest of Scottish football, because virtually every team we play have got players who have come through the Celtic Academy. And that's not good enough, but this is an argument I see quite a lot on Twitter. But look at all the guys that have had careers elsewhere. Would it not be better if Celtic were producing players that played with Celtic?
There's the argument you could do away with the academy and just spend all the money on a reserve team and do, what Tony Burns used to do, glamour friendlies against the likes of Bayern, etc., and get first team ready players. Because right now we've got academy players, but we don't have anywhere really to play them, and they're not getting first team ready. So perhaps, we could perhaps look at remodelling it. Get a reserve team that flies all over Europe playing the best teams, getting us first team ready players, and maybe that's where to put the money.
I was talking, every time I speak to someone who's involved in the game, Lawrence, I ask them their opinion on that, because you're looking at Celtic. Yes, we've been focusing far too much on the short term during the 9 in a row era, in terms of there's another one, it's 7, it's 8, it's 9, we're going for the 10. But we've been left with a situation where we quite clearly seen, and it wasn't for a lack of effort, the kids that came in against Livy and Hibs weren't ready. They were not ready for Celtic's first team. And that's because we don't have the pathway for the youth player to jump from youth to first team. And it used to be bridged by the reserve league, which is gone and will never return. So there has to obviously be another way of doing it. But we just can't continue to invest something like £2.5 million plus a year on an academy that's producing players for someone else. So I think if the club were to come out, as Natasha says, and actually sell us this vision that we're investing in these two guys who may not be, in terms of a manager, a household name, but this is why we're doing it, and this is our 3, 5, 7 year plan. And maybe, when we look 5 years down the line, this is how many players, who will actually be looking at Celtic's first team rather than Bayern Munich's academy or wherever. I mean, Liverpool, the goalkeeper that went into Liverpool was on the bench the other night. Celtic have invested years in the development of these young footballers and are going elsewhere. So at this moment in time, I think if they were to communicate their vision properly, a lot of Celtic fans would accept that and would buy into it. I get the quick, reaction that you get if you were to announce Martinez and Benitez. I've spoke about Martinez on this podcast, like I say, back in October. I also like the idea of some of the kind of safer, steadier hands. I've heard Steve Clarke's name getting mentioned. Wouldn't really excite people, but you would do a decent enough job. Obviously, we've spoken to Mark Hughes on this podcast, who's an experienced manager, and interestingly enough, I seen him on Sky last night on the Monday Night Football show talking about his future. There's plenty of managers who are in the frame, but it would basically just be putting it into the same structure we have currently. I think if you really need to restructure the way Celtic are going to produce players and then progress, not just domestically but in Europe, and I hope in my lifetime that is going to be something that is realistic to actually become a team that's looking, and a fan base that's looking towards Europe is a valid criteria in terms of your aims and objectives for a season, because it doesn't seem to have been for some time. Then I think the change in structure is something that they need to start communicating to us on. I mean, Lawrence, for example, you just know, right? It's a bit like clickbait online. If you put out that big name and Celtic announce that big name, the season tickets will take care of themselves. But really, I just think you're masking what has been a serious issue over a number of years.
But you can bring a big name in and change the structure. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Bringing in a big name doesn't rule out changing the structure. I'm hoping that they've got the director of football and the manager already lined up, and it's just news management now, the way they done with Rodgers when they announced them. So, but bringing in a big name doesn't need to be mutually exclusive to restructuring, does it? It's you can do both. You can aim high on whoever you're going to put into that structure, aim as high as you want, and put the best structure in place.
It seems a little bit more short term for me because, like, you know, Eddie Howe comes in. Let's say there's another name. It's not my preferred choice, but Eddie Howe comes in, and it's another Brendan Rodgers scenario, isn't it? Within 3 years, he's going to be looking down south. What jobs are available? I've done okay up here. You know, so it seems a wee bit more short term if you were to bring in the higher profile name.
I think any manager that's been successful up here is going to have offers from down south. And I think it's, you know, perhaps a paradigm shift that we need to be aware of. But, you know, we get 9 million for Rodgers in his team. If we put in a structure in place that, you know, meant we're changing the manager every 3 years, which I think Strachan said is probably the manager's lifestyle, lifespan at Celtic. What's wrong with that? You know, if that's our business plan, so like, we'll get the best manager we can. We understand he's successful here, progresses is in Europe. He's going to look at moving down south, or he's going to have suits down south, and we'll get a compensation package. And surely we'll then get another list of candidates to replace him. You know, it's when you lose a manager and you don't see it coming and don't have any plan for replacement would be negligent. But yeah, I think it goes with the territory of having a successful manager. Other clubs are going to cover him, and we've got to be able to plan for that. Either they offer them enough money or to keep him, or a package to keep him, or a working environment to keep him, or having a replacement plan in place.
The other big name, Natasha, that's been kind of spoken about on this podcast and elsewhere, Rafa Benitez, who wants to stay in Europe to be competitive at a high level. I do remember speaking actually to, it was Paddy McCourt, and this was last time round when Benitez was being spoken about. And what he said to me was quite interesting, because he said, you know, that type of manager, he wants to go to a club where he feels he can win a European trophy. Is Celtic that club?
Short answer at the moment, no. You know, if he's talking about wanting to, you know, go to one of the big European leagues, you know, that's not Scotland. Unfortunately, that's not Scotland, and we're not going to be able to attract a manager like Rafa Benitez if that's his ambition. The most we could hope for there is tell him that we plan on being a side that competes in Europe every single season, is getting out the group stages, you know, 3 times out of 5, and that we've got strong ambitions to better ourselves in Europe, and this is how we're going to achieve it. That's the only way you could possibly tempt someone like Benitez. But, you know, the likelihood is he's going to have offers from other clubs across Europe who are going to, if not already, be achieving that. You know, that's going to be their plan too. So I think it would be a hard sell to Benitez, but that's up to the club to try and match that ambition. In terms of a restructure, I think now is the time to do it if we want to rebuild and have a different sort of setup in place. You know, it's not, you know, the last few seasons I wanted us to be risk averse as we were building up to a 10 in a row, which unfortunately hasn't happened. You know, it's not like we were in the throes of 7, 8, 9, just trying to keep it ticking over without, you know, rocking the boat too much. You know, now's the time to do that. The 10 is gone, we're restarting. Now's the time to put a new structure in place if we're ever going to do it, rather than just simply someone replacing Lennon. In terms of succession planning, you know, if you do bring in a double act like Martinez and Maloney, have them in place for a couple of years with a view to Maloney taking it over in a few years. You know, if it's going to be someone like, you know, Berger, Harkin and Maresca, have that sort of succession lining in place, and that way you don't lose the momentum if a manager suddenly decides to leave after 3 seasons to go to England. Have that in place. And I think, touching back on Lawrence's point about, you know, the reserve side or an academy, whatever it's going to be, the importance is that, you know, there's the same ethos and the same football being played at all levels, so that we don't have the situation where we need to use someone from an academy or a reserve side and they're just nowhere near the first team. And having someone perhaps like Maresca, who does a lot of work with, you know, younger players, academy players, an under-23 squad, whose focus is on developing them to then become first players for Manchester City. You know, if we can have him imposing his ethos and his style, not only in the first team, but across our, you know, youth teams and our reserve side, I'd like to see us go down that route. Like you've touched on, the difficulties in signing players, Brexit, Europe issues, we're going to have to start looking at our academy and the domestic league a lot more. So having someone who can nourish our academy and, you know, harness the better players in the league that we have at the moment is going to be really important.
Absolutely. I mean, I see different names every single day, Natasha, and I'm certainly being drawn towards more of a long-term view. Walter Mazzarri, ex-Inter and Napoli, was mentioned today. We've had Chris Sutton naming Martin O'Neill or even Mick McCarthy as the Celtic manager. Gary Caldwell backed John Kennedy. Frank McAvaney disagreed with him. Everybody has an opinion, but that does take us on to the John Kennedy question. You mentioned him earlier on, Lawrence. How do you think Celtic did in the first game post Lenny? Was there a huge difference?
I don't think much, kind of 15 minutes to half time was fairly decent. First 15 minutes a bit scrappy. Second half there wasn't much in it, but we're playing with an unsettled defence and an unsettled keeper. We're not a team full of confidence, but I didn't see much difference. I suppose Kennedy, he's taken a lot of flack on this show this season, but perhaps part of Celtic's thinking was don't get caught out of a manager leaving again. Maybe that's why Lenny didn't get to pick his staff, because he didn't want a manager leaving with everyone again. So maybe Celtic thought, well, one way to do that is don't let the manager pick his staff. You pick all the staff, and if the manager leaves, it's just the manager. Who knows? But whatever happened, that group of three didn't work, did it? It was there was some kind of sorrowful mystery with those three. Maybe Kennedy would be better without Lenny. Maybe Lenny would be better without Kennedy. But he's got another 7 games to show us what he can do. He's got nothing to lose, has he? By putting his own ideas across. We're going to finish second. He's got 2 Old Firm games, which if he wins both resoundingly, I'm sure if nothing else, it will always be well thought of after that. So listen, it's down to John to show us what he can do. But first game, didn't see really much changes. But what we're expecting, kind of one game in, maybe kind of third and fourth game, we should see some better changes.
Natasha, what about yourself? Again, I seen kind of mixed reactions. I was looking at the Twitter comments, and by the way, Lawrence, you just called the 2 Derby games Old Firm games, just so that you're aware that there's loads of comments coming your way on that. But I think that there was certain elements, maybe I was looking too deeply into it. Obviously, he brought back Klimala, which I found interesting. It might just be a case of, well, you know what, Ajeti and Griffiths have had plenty of chances this season. Let's give Klimala a run out. And run he certainly can, but I don't know what else he brings to it. I've been looking at the goal. I know that it was his run that pulled 2 of the defenders with him, giving Edouard some space. Did you see anything that was more positive after Lenny?
Do you know what? I'm maybe, trying to be a bit more optimistic, but I thought the first half was better. I thought we had a better tempo. I thought the passing was quicker. And there were some encouraging signs there. Bain, after the game, said that Kennedy's instructions were to play out short, quickly from the back. And I thought that was definitely noticeable, and dare I say, perhaps trying to emulate a Brendan Rodgers type style that Kennedy obviously worked under. So there was encouraging signs in the first half. I was pleased. And then, as has happened all too often this season, it was completely dismantled in the second half. I have no idea why we consistently drop off in the second half and revert back to our old ways, but we did again at the weekend, and it's frustrating. Is it fitness? Do the fitness levels drop off in the second half? Do the other team change their shape a bit more? Do they, when it's still 1-0, do they come out and try something different and we don't adapt as quickly as we should? So first half, more encouraging. Second half, back to the same old, but we can't expect things to change overnight either. It's still 2/3 of the same management team in place, and it's still the same squad that he's working with. So yes, Kennedy might be able to inflict his own style of play slightly more, but there's not going to be a quick fix here. We're not going to see miracles overnight with the same group of players and the same management team. But there were encouraging signs, so hopefully we see more of the first half display, get carried over into the weekend. And I'd like to see Klimala get another chance. I think he was probably frustrated at being taken off relatively early. He would be frustrated at a couple of the chances he missed. But I liked his work rate, and I liked some of his movement off the ball. What he was doing off the ball was perhaps creating some of the space that Edouard then got. And to be honest, I think he could just do with a goal or two to help his confidence. If that chance that he really should have scored had went in, I think he could have really kicked on from that. So I'd give him another shot, see how we can partnership up with with Edward, and I'd like to see us stick with one of them partnering Edward to give them that bit of consistency to see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, another one I seen during the game when I was watching it was some comments coming in about Sorrell, the reintroduction of Sorrell. But of course, if you did that, you're going to drop Scott Brown. So I was looking and listening to his interview with interest, where he was asked the question whether he would be interested in the Celtic manager's job, and he just laughed, as Scott Brown would. But he is 36 in June. Natasha, what is the future for Bruni? I think it would be a bad mistake, a really big mistake, if we were to allow him to leave this summer. I think it's key to keep as many leaders as we possibly can during the transition.
Absolutely. It's something we've touched on already, is that we've probably let too many leaders go for this season. They weren't going to be the best footballers in the world, but I do think that losing players in the dressing room like Lustig and Hayes, Craig Gordon, further back looking at Sinclair and Simonovic, those were players who seemed to get it. They were leaders. They were going to take the game by the scruff of the neck and win it. And I think we probably just got rid of too many of those type of player from the dressing room to really drive us on this season. That's not saying that Johnny Hayes is better than Greg Taylor or Diego Laxalt, but he could have done a job this season. Simonovic, I know he had his injury problems. Look at the centre half problems we've had. Craig Gordon, he would have certainly been in the nets at some point, I'm sure, and done perhaps a better job than any of the three we've seen and have. So I think we did make a mistake in letting too many of that type of player go for one reason or the other. And letting Scott Brown go at the end of this season, I think would fall into that category. Now, I'm not saying that he needs to be in the middle of the park every single game, but he can have a significant impact on the squad in the dressing room, around the training ground. And particularly if we're going to go through this period of rebuilding, restructure, upheaval, having players around like Scott Brown who get the club is important. And while it might not be in a playing capacity every single week, I know he's done his coaching badges, a player coach sort of role. I just think it's going to be imperative to keep him around for another season, although he might have slightly different ambitions. If he doesn't see his career ending yet, if he thinks he's got another season or two in him, then he might look to somewhere like Australia to see if he can prolong his career slightly longer there before coming back. Again, I wouldn't begrudge him that, but I'd like to keep him around for a little longer.
I think it's key that we keep our leaders, and there's plenty of comments coming in relation to Kris Ajer. In the crowd via YouTube says, Celtic can't match the ambition of Ajer and he will leave the club in the summer, in my opinion. And Joe Mack says Kris Ajer is already planning his move out of the club unless we make a good appointment. That can't keep him here for another year or so. I think I'm resigned to the fact that he probably will be on his way. David Kelly, not even a glimmer of hope that Ajer is staying, I'm afraid. We can only hope for good money, 12 million maybe, considering the contract situation, and wish him all the best. I think that there will come a time in the future where we see Kris Ajer playing at the very highest level in European football. Lawrence Conley.
Well, what did we sell Van Dijk for? Was it 20? Kieran Tierney for 25? Ajer's up there, that kind of level. And I know he's only got 12 months on his contract, doesn't he?
Van Dijk was only 12 and a half.
Was that? Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Got robbed.
So 12 and a half. Yeah, and got robbed for Tierney. He's already Arsenal's best player. So Ajer's already at that level, I think, anyway. So I know he's only got 12 months left, but there's not a lot of kind of 22, 23-year-olds round about with his kind of experience and potential. So why should we be taking less for him than, for example, we're going to take for Edward?
Well, that I think would have been always your starting point, before the pandemic, but that just throws everything into disarray, doesn't it, when it comes to the financials? And, how much money is going to be getting thrown about all over Europe in the summer. I think that's going to be a massive element to that as well. I mean, you look at Frimpong, 11.5, and I know we didn't get the full amount after all the sell-on clauses that were inserted into the original contract. But Celtic are going to be looking at, I think, in the region of 12 to 15. I think that would be realistic. A year, or even 2 years ago, it would have been a bigger fee. It's the same with Eddie. When Eddie goes, some of the fees that we've seen quoted, the vast sums of money, even if he gets 25 goals this season, I don't think we're going to be able to attain that level that we would have done 18 months ago, Lawrence.
I think it's it's definitely a buyer's market, but if you 2 or 3 of the big clubs looking after him, are after him, why not? Look at the money they pay down in England. He does well when he plays for the French unders. He's got great goal scoring record, great potential. Why not ask for higher money? Why accept it for lower money? He's got to move on. If it's Brendan comes in for him, but we know the EPL clubs have still got money.
We've not dealt with Leicester, have we, since Brendan Rodgers' departure? So we'll see. We'll have a look at that with interest. Mark, welcome back to the show on YouTube. The only difference in Saturday's match was the name of the man in charge of picking the 11. Robbie Smith, first half was good, we played better. Second half was drivel. And from Facebook, the best part of the Aberdeen game was the first 15 minutes because we couldn't see them. That was fairly disappointing, wasn't it? I had to tune into Aberdeen TV, I think it's Red TV, for the first 15 minutes or so. But again, this comes into the whole discussion around the added value, the season ticket renewals, Natasha, that we've spoken about already. And I am hoping that the level of engagement increases. Paul Lambert simply said about the incoming Dominic Mackay, rugby is a totally different sport. Well, thanks for that, Paul. But I think what Dominic Mackay is going to try and implement is definitely more engagement with the fans. It's something that he's got a track record in doing. He's all about increasing the turnover, but reinvesting it in the certain areas and departments within the football club that requires them. So I think a completely different approach is going to come along with Dominic Mackay. And part of that approach could well be, I feel, the removal of Nicky Hammond and his cohort Gary Penrice. The story has broken over the week that they're on their way out. And it was interesting to read Tam McManus. Now, I know Tam's a big pal of Stephen Fletcher, so you're basically taking this as gospel, but he says that Fletcher was desperate to sign for Celtic. Neil Lennon wanted him, but it came down to Nicky Hammond. Nicky Hammond was the spanner in the works there. Is it time, Natasha, for us to have a clean sweep and remove Nicky Hammond and Gary Penrice as well?
Yeah, I think so. If we're going for this full restructure and rebuild, then let's do it. There's no doubt that everyone at the club has failed this season. And to be honest, when you look further into it, the scouting department has failed for a lot longer than that. So yeah, let's get some new people in with some fresh ideas, some fresh thinking, and a new way of looking at things, and new ambition. And if that means that everyone needs to go, then fair enough. Obviously, we're not going to do a complete clear out because that could cause some instability. But let's get some new people in, and the people who have been there for too long, it's got stale and they've got unambitious. They can go. Similarly to Fletcher, look at a player like Tony, who apparently was, in the building at Celtic Park and then thought that was going to go through, and the last minute, I don't know if it was Hammond or Lawwell, pulled the plug on that. And now he's getting quoted at 25 million. It's decisions like this, even the McGinn decision before that. It's decisions like this that have been hampering Celtic, and we don't seem to be able to get these deals over the line. So the ones that are stopping it, the ones that are putting the hurdles in the place, whether that's Lawwell, who's on his way out, whether that's Hammond, who could also be on his way out, then good. Let's let them leave and rebuild with some new faces.
I totally agree with that. Hugh Jameson's just put a wee vision in my mind. He's talking about a wannabe Klamala. But we are going to be looking at a situation, I guess, Lawrence, where, like the Stuart Armstrong song, we're going to see another set of fans singing the Eddie song. And that will be tinged with sadness for me.
Yes and no. I mean, first half of this season, where was he? It was a really important season, and I don't think he turned up. And I think it's been alluded to, he thought he got a move blocked. And I think he's been playing for a move since late December. Before that, really, where was he and what did he add to the season? Yeah, he's a guy with great potential, but I don't think he ever gives all. He could have slipped in sore at the weekend, Strachan's own mental, because it was more about Eddie than Celtic winning 2-0 and getting a second goal and securing the game. And
absolutely.
Klamala suffered from that as well. The players always playing to Eddie. Klamala's making some great runs. The players wanted to try and find Eddie instead. I think it's too much about Eddie and and not enough about the club or about the team.
Natasha said something earlier about give Klamala a run. Play him against Dundee United, give him a run. I know the first game against Rangers, Lawrence, you and I watched that together. He was poor. I thought he was poor in that game. But if you're going to give him a run, he's going to have to play in that game as well. There's a very interesting analysis of Klamala's performance, so check it out. There's the link. I know you can't click on that, but there's the link from Tom. Have a look at that. I read it during the week. Moravchik 25 agrees with Natasha. Give Paddy the last 7 games to acquire touch and confidence. At least the lad is physically fit for purpose. Natasha, is there anybody else within the Celtic squad that you think deserves that last 7 games to get a run out to show us what they're capable of? I mean, we've seen it with Sorrow and Turnbull. They were thrown in to the dead rubber against Lille in Europe, and we got 2 of our best performances of the season out of that. Should we give a few others a run out?
Sorrow's the one that came to mind. Brown doesn't need to play every game. Get Sorrow in there and get him to form a partnership. Let's see how him, McGregor, Turnbull work together for 4 or 5 games in a row, and let's really see how that looks, because that's what's going to be in place next season. So I want to see more of that. Even if we're considering, what's been quoted is that we're considering a £5 million bid of El Yunusi. If we are considering spending money on him, let's see him. Let's play him regularly and see if he's going to be worth spending that money on. Maybe we start to look at some of the youth players, giving them a chance here and there. Let's see more of Mikey Johnston. Let's see more of Ewan Henderson. If we're going to be thinking that they're the sort of players who could benefit from a loan deal for experienced next season at some other club, if we're going to put them out to Hibs or Ross County or Kilmarnock, whoever, let's see how they look in the Celtic squad. There's plenty of games left this season for them to get experience in. Let's have a look at them. There's relatively little to play for in the league anyway, so let's give some of those players a chance and see how they look.
Here's a message coming in there from Gillian Gallagher saying that Bruni played brilliant again the other day and we need his leadership on the park just now. I think his leadership's massive, and that goes into next season as well. Even if he was to play 25 games next season, and not start them all, I just think to have him in the dressing room, to have him on the side of the park, I think that's pivotal for this issue that we raised at the top of the show, Natasha, where Frimpong comes in. He's got this kind of shrug of the shoulders attitude. You win some, you lose some. And you think, well, no, that isn't the mentality at Celtic here. This is the mentality. Now, Lawrence made a point about Peter Grant. I remember being told a similar story, Lawrence, in relation to Tommy Burns, and how Tommy Burns would take young players to the side, take new players to the side, and give them, pep talks, 30 minutes, 40-minute pep talks about what it is that is expected of them as soon as they pull on the hoops for Celtic. And I think the modern game, we romanticise about these things looking back, but, it's still 11v11 on the park, and sometimes if you get that extra few percent, it's these kind of margins that win you games. I mean, Celtic have lacked in so many departments this season. But a lot of people, and this is a first for a long time, people have been suggesting that there's been a lack of desire. And that for a Celtic fan, hurts us the most, I think. I mean, if it's a lack of ability, we've seen so many players playing for Celtic in the past. You mentioned Peter Grant, Lawrence. Peter Grant wasn't the best midfield player Celtic's ever had, but he gave you the heart, he gave you the desire. And so, when Celtic fans see that passion to succeed and win, then it almost does away with that lack of talent. You then, on the flip side, see someone like Edouard who's got talent to absolutely burn, but if he doesn't apply the heart and the passion, he doesn't look interested. And we've seen so many players like that. So I think it's absolutely key that Scott Brown plays a part next season. But I'm going to flip this again, and I'm going to come to you first, Natasha. With that being said, with that familiarity, it's going to be pivotal going into next season with so many changes. Is there a place, not in the manager's chair, for the future of Celtic for John Kennedy?
Somewhere, yes, I think there is. Not the manager's chair for me. And I, along with everyone else on this show, has given Kennedy a hard time. He does look very uninspiring on the touchline. If I was a player with any 3 of them on the touchline, I wouldn't feel particularly inspired. And the blame for this season can't solely be on Lennon. Kennedy and Strachan are on that training pitch just as much. They're also the ones who are unable to get a team to defend a set piece or, teach them to play in any form of shape. But Kennedy's been around the club for a long time. Mm-hmm. I really believe that he gets Celtic as well. whether there's a gap in a coaching department for him, I think there probably is. And I wouldn't mind seeing him being kept around under a new structure.
What about yourself, Lawrence? I mean, we see a lot of these names, and again, there's a criticism a lot of the time about it's jobs for the boys. They're only there because of their affinity with Celtic rather than their ability to coach. There's a lot of players at Celtic, ex-players at Celtic at the moment. Do you think Kennedy will remain? I've seen somewhere that he'd been at the club for about 3 decades. He's only 37.
Yeah, I think it's a decision we should leave to the new manager. You know, he's got attributes. It's not really shown this season, but you know, Rodgers apparently rated him highly. You know, your Kieran Tierney's been out speaking about how good he was for his career. You know, you'd expect a new director of football, a new manager, whatever head coach, whatever the structure is, to come in and have a look at it. I don't think it's just, you know, float out. You've got to give whoever you put in charge of those matters a decision. Argument for keeping Kennedy, you know, especially if he's a good back 8 games. You know, it makes it stronger. I think the team's definitely lacked fight, which is probably the worst thing you could say. You know, sometimes there was players that they just seem to be happy to accept a poor game this season. And I think, you know, John isn't someone I think that would accept that, you know, if he was playing. So I think he would get it over to players that would point out, much like Peter did in the past, what the expectations are at Celtic.
Peter the pointer, eh? There is one comment that I'll leave you to think about. Kenny 67, Ajeti should get a run now. Klimala isn't good enough. There are better strikers in the SPL, including Shankland. I guess what I'm thinking about now is players proving themselves. Like you said earlier, Natasha, give Moy a few games, see if we should sign him. I think another element of that is give Barkas some games. Now, I think he has been injured. Give him some games. I mean, we're now apparently playing more from the back, a la Brendan Rodgers, which I think, you know, Barkas was a Brendan Rodgers type player coming in and playing the sweeper keeper. Give him some games. See if he's a £5 million flop or if there's a future for Barkas at the club. Surely we can't write off £10 million the talent with him and Ajeti come the summer. It's been great coming back to the ACSOM Bulletin for the Tuesday stint with Lawrence Connolly and Natasha Meikle. I'll be back on Thursday. But the team will be back on tomorrow, Wednesday, with Colin Watt and Amy Canavan. Tonight, Kevin Graham and Russell Boyce will be back with ACSOM's Screamer Celica. If you haven't done so already, get subscribing on YouTube. We produce daily content and it's all absolutely free. And all that's left for me to say, Lawrence and Natasha, thank you once again for joining me.